listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Sustainable Business, a podcast hosted by the Conference Board's Global Sustainability Center. I'm your host, Claudia Lee. I'll be talking to leaders of global corporates and startup founders about how they integrate business and sustainability. It may be challenging, but these companies show that it is definitely feasible. Now, let's talk sustainable business. Today, I will be sitting down with Simon Hombersley, CEO of Xampla. Simon is an experienced clean tech entrepreneur. During his career, he has leveraged tech to solve different environmental issues. Simon is currently the CEO of Xampla, a company that develops natural alternatives to plastics. He's also the founder of Lantra, an engineering firm developing and commercializing energy-saving compressors. Today, we will be focusing our discussion on Xampla and the wider problem of global plastics pollution. Xampla is actually a Cambridge University spin-off that has been in development for over 15 years. The company focuses on using plant protein material as a material that substitutes plastics for commercial uses like packaging and film, for food and beverage, and other household products. Xampla was recently named the top 50 green tech companies in the UK in 2022 by Business Cloud. Simon is here with me today to talk all about Xampla's innovative patented technology and how we as businesses and consumers can action to curb the global plastics pollution. Hi, Simon. Welcome to the Let's Talk Sustainable Business podcast.
Thank you very much, Claudia. It's good to be here.
I hope you had a lovely weekend, and I'm glad to be able to start this week off with a podcast with you. So first off, can you summarize what Xampla offers in a few sentences?
We are the only company in the world making replacements for plastic from plant protein. And that sounds like a scientific differentiation, but actually there's a reason for that. Plant proteins are incredibly high performance materials. So Xampla offers replacements to the most polluting plastics, and those are single-use plastics and microplastics. We use our material to replace the existing materials, and we can create materials, products that function like plastic but cause no pollution to the environment at all.
Mm-hmm. So I understand that there's also another category of plastics called bio-based plastics made from plant-based materials. How does Xampla differentiate itself from this type of plastics?
It's a really complicated field, and it's very difficult
Uh-huh.
for lots of customers, actually, in particular, to identify what the right and wrong choices are. So let me phrase it like this: there is a new next generation of materials coming through that are plant-based, and we are just one of them. There's a whole group of us coming through, and these are broadly natural polymers. So materials that are found in nature that can be turned into useful plastic type products without any chemical modification. And that's a really important classification, and that's the future of these materials. Now, there is a first generation of products out there that people think of as plastic replacements. And the language around this is quite complicated and confusing, but they're often known as bioplastics or bio-based materials and so forth. Some of those are good, but some of them aren't, and it is quite complicated. But broadly, the choices that purchasers should be making now for the next generation materials are natural polymers. So products which start as plants, are not chemically modified, and are then turned into useful things. And they include us, but they include seaweed, alginates, certain paper products. There's a whole series of other products in this category as well.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's really interesting. Um, so you mentioned that there are other types of natural plant-based plastics made of seaweed and other ingredients coming from nature. Can you tell me a bit more about what type of material Sampla's replacement material is made of?
Yes, and our material is based around plant protein. So
Hmm.
plants contain two building blocks, essentially. One is plant polysaccharides, starches, and the other is plant proteins. Plant polysaccharides are easy to work with, and they're widely available and very sustainable, but they often lack performance because starches dissolve, essentially. They're very weak materials. Plant proteins on the other hand, are incredibly strong materials. And in nature, they are the performance materials. Now, they're quite hard to work with. And the breakthrough that we, as a University of Cambridge spin out, have achieved is how to engineer those plant proteins to control their properties and turn them into different materials. So that's essentially it. There's two building blocks in plants, polysaccharides and proteins, and we're unique in using the highest performance natural polymer that exists, which is plant proteins.
Okay. Wow. Okay. All of this is very technical.
I'm
But I.
sorry for going full science on you there, but it's a scientific
Mhm.
differentiation. But what it
Mhm.
means is ultimately you can take a flexible film, a sachet, or a wrap. What these are the most polluting plastics, and with our products, they've got decent shelf life. They can last as long as the customer needs them to. They've got high strength, good barrier properties, so they perform like the plastics that are familiar. But when they hit the soil, or if they hit the oceans, or whatever, they're actually simply digested and disappear to nothing because there's no chemical modification. So that's what it means for our customers is they can offer their customers, the consumers or the packaging sort of products, plastic replacements which perform like plastic but cause absolutely no harm to the planet.
Mhm. Amazing. Actually, that moves me on to my next question, which is with so many different types of plastics out there and the different uses of plastics from packaging to film and plastic bags, is Zampla's material applicable to a wide variety of potential uses, or is it limited to, say, plastic film and certain other types of packaging?
We are building here in Cambridge the team that is the world leaders in the replacements to single-use plastic. So that includes a whole range of different products and use cases and so forth. We're focused to start with on the most polluting, which is flexible films in particular, but also some of these microplastic applications that we as consumers never see. They're inside ingredients, they're in our laundry products or our personal care shampoos and shower gels and so forth. But those are microplastics, and we can replace those. So Xampla has a big old range of things that we can be doing, but we're very focused in the near term. But what I would say is that when we think about plastic, it's not just about changing the material itself. Uh, Different types of materials can deliver different functions. So, an example I would say is when you buy a bottle of squash, of concentrate, of some sort of soft drink beverage, you've often got quite thick plastic bottles around it in order to protect the ingredients inside that beverage. Now,
Yes.
what we're working on is microparticles that can go inside the drink itself to protect the nutrient that needs to be protected. And you can then reduce or change the plastic bottle itself. So there are often ways to rethink plastic and what it does in our lives. Because plastic, nobody actually wants plastic, but everybody benefits from what plastic delivers to us as consumers and as businesses. And
Hmm.
that's a different way of thinking about it. And it sounds quite complicated, but actually it's perfectly logical. In 10 years' time, you will probably not go into a supermarket and buy a great big bottle of shampoo and take it home. You'll probably buy a small concentrate in a
Hmm.
soluble plastic wrapper that you then make up at home. So, in an example like that, you can engineer out the use of that PET plastic bottle by
Hmm.
replacing it with a novel material. And that's some of the areas that we're working on, as are others in this sector.
Oh, I see. That's actually really fascinating. The fact that you're not only creating a plant-based substitute to plastics, but also trying to almost change consumer behavior by creating these other types of products that would actually replace the use of plastics.
And I think we are trying to offer our customers, who are the
Hmm.
people who buy plastics, the businesses, options for innovation to excite and stimulate their consumers. So
Hmm.
we don't believe that we should ever try and tell a consumer not to use plastic. That's not helpful. But what we can do is make it easy for consumers to continue to benefit from all the fun things they get from their brands, convenience and use functionality and so forth, but without polluting the planet. And that's the sort of areas we could do. So we launched, for instance, in the UK last year, a product with Gusto, who are a home recipe delivery company, and we
Yes, I
developed for
hear their
them.
ads all the time.
Yeah, well, exactly. They're a fantastic, fast-growing business, a very exciting, dynamic business.
Hmm.
And we developed for them a stock cube wrapper that instead of the consumer receiving a stock cube and unwrapping it and throwing away the plastic, the consumer receives the stock cube. They throw the whole thing, including its wrapper, into the pot, give it a stir, and they eat their own packaging.
Yeah.
Now, that is not only solving the plastic pollution problem that Gusto wanted to address for its own sustainability targets, but it's also creating a really exciting consumer story. This is a new, exciting consumer thing, and it tested very, very well in the initial launch, and we're rolling it out next year into sort of full production.
Wow, congratulations. That's really exciting. And also it also adds to the convenience. That's actually one less step for the consumer to have to take by removing the step of taking out the plastic packaging, taking out the stock cube from the packaging and then also throwing it away. So,
Absolutely, and convenience is what plastic brings us. And if you
mhm,
look at something like a dishwasher tablet or a Tide Pod, these are very, very convenient formats that consumers love. But the problem with a lot of those materials is that they're synthetic and they're polluted. So that dishwasher tab that you think dissolves and disappears, it doesn't disappear. It goes out into the watercourse, and that's microplastic pollution. So we at Xampla are working towards delivering products that give the same performance, the same consumer convenience, and give the brands what they need to excite their consumers, but simply without the plastic pollution. And that's the way that we all, I
mhm.
think, in this sector should be thinking about how we solve these problems.
Absolutely. Actually, it's really interesting that you just pointed that out because I also use dishwasher tablets that have uh, a plastic packaging around it. But because I don't need to remove it, I thought that it is already a bio-based plastic that is biodegradable. But according to what you just said, it might not necessarily be the case.
It isn't the case. That material is made from PVOH, which is an oil-based
Hmm.
synthetic plastic. It dissolves and it disappears, but it doesn't fully biodegrade, and that is contributing to plastic pollution. And again, it's an interesting observation you make there because our relationship as consumers with plastic is relatively limited. We often, when we put that plastic bottle into the recycling bin, that's the end of our emotional engagement with that
Yes.
product. We think we've done the right thing by putting it in the recycling. The reality is, in the UK, somewhere around 9% of plastic gets recycled effectively. Most of it goes to landfill or it's incinerated. But nonetheless, our duty and our responsibility seems to end at that point. And similarly with your dishwasher tab, you're right. You sling it in, you trust the brand to have made the decision for you, and the fact that actually it's a microplastic pollution issue is not in your sort of range of responsibility. It's completely
Hmm.
understandable, but we need to work with that. We need to allow brands to continue to offer the convenience, but we need to solve that problem for the brands. Essentially, we need to give them an ethical replacement for that PBOH, so the consumer doesn't need to trouble themselves with it. This is one of those challenges with this whole sector. It's so complicated. I sometimes think that a consumer needs a PhD in material science just to know what bin to put their plastic recycling into. We have to simplify all of this, and we as technology providers and the brands as the responsible trusted partners need to solve these problems for consumers so they can just carry on enjoying their convenience without getting involved in all of this.
That's really true. And I think there is definitely a line to be drawn between a consumer's responsibility and a corporation and the government's responsibility to deal with plastics pollution. And sometimes corporates almost turn the uh, flip the responsibilities and make it the consumer's responsibility to recycle. And I think that is to an extent not fair because as consumers we have limited understanding of materials, as you said, and also not all recycling facilities, say in the UK or abroad, are capable of allowing us to properly recycle certain things. So in the end, I think technology has a big part to play, as well as the government in sort of maintaining and making sure corporates are not overly or polluting at all. And that's why also I respect companies like Sampler who are really trying to innovate um, and just develop solutions that can really help corporates while not affecting their mode of business.
Absolutely, but I would say that I think that some of the largest companies on the planet who
Mm-hmm.
are the plastic polluters are very sincerely and genuinely committed to reducing their plastic usage.
Mm-hmm.
They just need the solutions. And the reason isn't, although some of them are doing it for wider ethical or sustainability reasons, the reason, like for any business, is it's good business. Consumers are increasingly angry about plastic, particularly single use plastics, and they're turning away from brands. And I think a lot of our customers that we're talking to, the larger companies we're talking to, have got extremely ambitious goals and targets for replacing plastic or wider sustainability goals that are beyond the regulations. They're beyond the standards that government is setting them. And the reason is quite simple. It's because the next generation of consumers don't accept plastic waste. And so the
Yes.
brands need to change in order to please their customers. And that's all big brands are, is that, they're incredibly attuned to what their customers want, and they try to give their customers what they want. And that's the opportunity here. Brands can work with companies like Xampla to give the consumer what they want, which is non-polluting plastic, but nonetheless convenience.
So when you work with a brand or a corporate, do you start off with offering them what products, say, you already have existing and talk about how you can customize it to suit their needs? Or do you actually work with them to develop something, to develop a type of plastic substitute that actually can suit their needs exactly?
Well, I think there's a bit of both there, Claudia. So for the
Mhm.
products that we have on the market right now that are available, those have been developed broadly with customers because customers, the businesses, they know their needs better than us. So it's important to stay
Mhm.
close to what they actually want. So we have developed products with customers that are now released and available for any customer to buy. But at the same time, in parallel, yes, we are working on longer term projects with brands and with potential partners to develop things specifically for those customers for that particular application need. One of the opportunities for us as a company is that
Mhm.
these are enormous markets and there are multiple applications. That's also one of the challenges for a startup is we have to remain focused and actually deliver what we say we're going to deliver in the near term. So hence our focus on flexible films and the microplastics.
Mhm. I also know that you were recently awarded or chosen as a finalist for the Tom Ford Plastic Innovation Prize, which is amazing, and congratulations for that.
Thank you.
And so, to listeners who are unfamiliar with this, basically the award recognizes world leading innovators who are creating sustainable alternatives to flexible film plastic that are sustainable and scalable by 2025. And Sampler was chosen as one of the eight finalists. And I read on your website that you will be focusing on poly bags, which are resealable storage bags that are used by people to store food mainly. So, can you tell me a bit more about how you will be innovating um, in this category, and what your vision is for this type of product?
I think our vision for that particular product category is the same as our vision for all of our
Hmm.
target areas, which is we need to deliver materials that are at the right scale and performance for customers, but at the same time cause no harm at end of life. So we were thrilled to be a finalist at the Tom Ford Prize. That's quite a long, extensive program that they're putting us through, including interacting with customers and detailed testing and lifetime and so forth. So I think the results of that, whoever wins, comes out next year now. So it's a long, thorough process. But essentially, it's in line with our strategy. We need to identify what customers, the people who buy plastic, want, and in that particular case, as you say, it's poly bags that can deliver the basic function of a poly bag, but without the plastic pollution. And then we need to formulate and engineer those products and work out how we're going to deliver them at scale. So it's very much in line with our wider strategy. I would say that for us, um, the soluble films, edible films, these sort of more innovative areas are the near term. Those are the products we have on available now for customers. If they came to us today and said, "I want a sachet to package a personal care product or something," that's what we can do today. Those polybags are the sort of next stage of the
Hmm.
process into next year and beyond.
Hmm. Got it. So you just mentioned you also offer sachets for personal care products. Can you give me some examples of that and how you can use that?
Well, I think it's an interesting area, but most of us, when we think about sachets, there are 855 billion single-use sachets produced on this planet every year. And
Wow.
it's quite weird to think of how that's actually possible. But if you travel to countries like Indonesia or India, the format of choice for personal care and often home care products as well is a 1 rupee sachet on a market stall, and that's what you buy your shampoo for the week or whatever. So that is a very, very common format in developing nations, and it offers convenience and it's a price point that those consumers that's relevant for that market. So
Hmm.
those are the sorts of things that we can work on replacing, in particular in those areas where the plastic pollution problem actually is also most acute. That it's those sachets that are washing up on beaches in Indonesia that are the problem that we're all trying to solve. But in developed nations, similarly, I mentioned your shampoo. That is where we're going into the future. Your bathroom will look very different in 10 years' time. You won't have all these bottles. We'll have single-use sachets and delivering concentrates and pastes. We may have soluble, dissolvable sachets. So we've worked on a soap bar wrapper that instead of throwing away the wrapper, you just give it a wash and you actually wash off the wrapper
Hmm.
itself. So these are the sorts of innovations that as I say, deliver what plastic delivers, which is convenience and hygiene and so forth, but nonetheless disappear and become completely natural at their end of their life.
Hmm. Wow, all of this seriously sounds really exciting. And already I can visualize convenience stores, supermarkets that offer that types of products. And it's really exciting to even hear about because I can tell that there's a lot of potential. And I personally, as a consumer, would be all for it, especially if it adds to convenience as well. But I'm sure the R&D process is definitely lengthy and full of challenges because there are so many potential problems that can arise. And I know that Xampla is actually a spin-off from the University of Cambridge that was 15 years in development already. Can you talk me through a bit more about the development process and whether there were any significant challenges during this process?
I think the major scientific breakthrough happened in the university. So our academic founder, about 15 years ago, asked himself the question: I wonder how a spider makes silk. And
Hmm.
that sounds an odd question to ask, but silk is one of the strongest materials in nature, and it's only made of proteins. It's an engineered protein material. So once he had worked out how a spider makes silk, he then thought, okay, well, can we learn from that? Can we, instead of using spider silk, which is a very expensive, complicated, and animal product, obviously, can we take simple plant proteins that are available all around the world and learn from the spider to engineer the same sorts of materials? And that was the breakthrough that was in the university and the basis of the IP of our company and so forth. So when we spun out from the university, and our first employee was actually January 2020, so we're still a relatively young company. Since then, we've been commercializing that and we've been developing the scaled up process, the optimized process, and working with launch customers to get those products out. And that was when last year in 21 we launched the edible stock cube wrapper, and now we're into microcapsules and these wider wrappers. So I think the main breakthrough was earlier, but I think for all of the companies in our sector, including us, the real challenge is scale up.
Hmm.
Plastics is a major commodity business, and we can't be credible with our customers if we can't offer them volumes that meet their requirements. A
Hmm.
Unilever brand globally might require hundreds of tons, thousands of tons of just one product line. So these are enormous brands. So that's the challenge for this phase: is how do we get to scale and thereby also offer the price point that these consumers need, because plastics basically is quite cheap. So we need to offer both of those.
Yes, I see. And currently, do you have one factory or production unit where all of the products are produced?
Yeah, but at the moment we're still in this crossover phase of getting scale. So we're working with subcontractors and partners, and we'll be building our own production in due course. But I would emphasize, again, part of our core strategy is we have to work with the existing plastic supply chain. The manufacturing assets that will be making plastics in 20 years' time have already been built. These are very, very, very cost-effective, efficient businesses that know how to run at high speed and make materials in vast volumes. So we have designed our resin, as it's known, the starter for plastic, to
Mm-hmm.
drop into existing manufacturing, and that's critical. So we don't need to build a big plastic, film production plant. They already exist. What we're doing is we're formulating and developing and supplying the resin, which we then ship to that manufacturing partner, who can make kilometers of rolls of film in absolute perfect manufacturing conditions.
Oh, I see. So what you're saying is that you're developing a material that will be able to be just input into conventional plastic manufacturing plants and then create that new product that Xampla offers instead of you offering the uh, finalized product and then sharing it to the consumers to the clients.
Absolutely,
Okay, okay.
absolutely,
Yes, and
and I
that
think
makes so much more sense.
yeah, and that's again a critical part of our sort of strategy is it is a complicated value chain, this, but essentially, a Unilever brand will have their existing plastic suppliers. They don't particularly want to buy product from a Cambridge startup. They want to buy it in different territories from different manufacturers that they've been working with for years, that are on framework and quality approved and so forth. So our job is to formulate and develop resins that can be supplied to those existing manufacturing partners and therefore into that supply chain. So as I say, it's all about focus for us as a business. We need to know exactly where our piece of the puzzle is in that value chain.
Wow, okay. So suppliers wise, does that mean that you're also constantly in touch with different suppliers around the world just to understand how they manufacture their plastics and then sort of customizing Sampla's products to their supply chain?
Yes, I think it's less about the manufacture process because
Mm.
most of that is pretty standard. There are only a few ways that people make volume plastic, so we can supply to that. What is important for us and where our expertise is in developing the resin, the formulation to deliver the performance that the end customer wants. And again, that's a change from the traditional plastics industry where plastics, essentially single-use plastics, are massively, monumentally over-engineered. It is ridiculous that that little plastic wrap that you remove from a sachet or whatever is designed to last 500 years. That's insane. So what we're doing is developing materials that are designed for a very specific application. If it's a soap bar wrapper that needs a 24-month shelf life and then to dissolve and disappear, that's what we're developing. So it needs to be manufactured in the same downstream conversion lines that traditional plastics are, but the formulation itself is what we can tweak and change so we can give our customers, the brands themselves, exactly what they need and fit within the existing manufacturing process.
Mm-hmm. Wow, okay. Um, got it. That's actually a really interesting business model as well, like knowing and also essential. I mean, knowing where you fit in the supply chain and then engineering your products based on that.
Yeah.
Is that something you developed along the way during the 15 years, or is that the idea from the very beginning to develop a product that can fit into a plastic production supply chain?
No, I mean, this is very much Sampla's part of the process. So,
Hmm.
so the
Hmm.
core science was done at the university, and then with the company spin out, that's when we bring in. We've hired people from 3M, Procter and Gamble, Unilever. We bring in industry experts, and we bring that understanding of the manufacturing and the supply chain process to it. But the fundamental point, I think, is valid that this whole business was started on is how do you learn from a spider to engineer things in a really sophisticated way, but in a completely low energy, completely natural, not chemical process. And that's the core science that underpins a business like Xampla.
So I believe the name for products or processes inspired by nature is called biomimicry. Um, is there like how else can we use nature as an inspiration to develop products that can really curb the environmental crisis?
I think biomimicry is actually essential to the next stage of our industrial development. In many ways, if nature has been doing things for millennia, and producing products or materials or whatever, and cause no harm to the environment. That is something we can all learn from. So that's certainly Xampla's starting point. How do we learn from the spider? But other processes out there are doing exactly the same thing, and we're seeing this in enzymatic engineering and a whole bunch of different areas around there. And if you think about it, the chemicals industry, which has delivered so much to our planet and to human civilization over the past century and a half, but that does involve an attitude of not so much working with nature, but trying to control and dominate nature, to create new molecules, to create new materials. What the future looks like is how do we take things that already exist and mess around with them as little as possible to create as little impact on the planet. And that's biomimicry, and I think it is very much a trend for the next couple of decades of our lives.
That really makes a lot of sense because if there are processes that are developed by nature, obviously those processes and products have existed for centuries, and they still are in existence now, which shows that they're the most resilient, most effective materials on the planet. And by doing that and being inspired by nature to create new generation materials, I think that probably is the best way forward to develop materials that work for nature and also for best suits our needs as well.
Absolutely, and there isn't really a natural concept of waste, and that's the sort of circularity thinking that we are all now, very aware of. Is that in nature, if something has reached its end of life in one stage, it goes off and becomes food for something else, and that's circularity. The synthetic products and materials made from oil don't have that circularity and are therefore waste in a way that the planet has never seen before, and that's what we need to change. And it's a change of thinking, and it's a change of working much more circular and sustainable way, where we think about the beginning and the end of life of materials as a cycle rather than fixed points.
I absolutely agree with you here, Simon. So, in the upcoming episode, we'll talk a bit more about how we can integrate this idea of circular thinking, not just um, perhaps in the plastics industry, but also like in the wider sense, and also how the plastics pollution issue can be solved or at least mitigated in the different points in the supply chain. So for now, thank you so much for the conversation, and we'll continue in the next episode.
Thank you very much.
Um, so, to all the listeners, I will be continuing this conversation with Simon Hombersley in the next episode, so keep your ears open for part two. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Let's Talk Sustainable Business. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our podcast series or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at www.conference-board.org. If you have any thoughts to share with us, you can email us at sustainability@tcb.org. Thank you.